Okay. Okay, welcome back everybody from the breakout sessions. So we've talked a lot about water security and all the things related to it within the Gulf region context. But what we want to do now is to expand that beyond this region and to talk about the role of Gulf countries in helping to define a water secure world everywhere, globally. And to help lead that conversation for us is Dr. Laurent Lambert. He is at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. And please, I'll leave it to you to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Raha. Can you hear me well? Yes? So distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, my name is Laurent Lambert. Raha has kindly introduced me, and it is my pleasure to welcome you for this new high-level panel. The role of Gulf countries in defining a water-secure world. We all know that water scarcity can foster cooperation and innovation, despite the often repeated prophecies of doom and gloom of water wars in the region, which have not happened, despite tension sometimes. Water has proven that it can serve as a fundamental role as a cooperative force and an economic driver of regional cooperation and integration in the region. And it can do it also in the world. This panel will delve into the national and collaborative strategies, including partnerships, interdisciplinary approaches, to address water security challenges collectively. We will have a discussion of existing policies and governance structures related to water security. And we will propose innovative frameworks that have been very important in the Gulf context. Of course, we will discuss the historical context of water stewardship and the current water development, as well as the opportunities and the challenges that define the situation in the Gulf region now. But we will also propose a visionary outlook. We will try to work about the next decade and beyond. We will work on it in terms of exploring what are the cooperation, innovation, regional potential in the region. To do this, with me for this panel, three very distinguished guests. Ms. Roula Majdalani. Roula is the climate change advisor at the ICADA. ICADA is an international organization that undertakes research for development to provide innovative, science-based agricultural solutions that improve the livelihood, resilience of rural dryland communities. She was previously director of the ESCWA Sustainable Development Policies Division in Beirut. The division that she used to direct promoted cooperation among ESCWA countries on the sustainable management of natural resources with a focus on water, energy, and green production. The second guest is Mr. Ziad Khayat from the ESCWA. Ziad is Economic Affairs Officer and Coordinator of the Integrated Water Resources Management, IWRM, for improved water security at the Climate Change and Natural Resources Sustainability Cluster of the United Nations, Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA. Mr. Khayat joined ESCWA in 2015, focusing on water-related sustainable development issues within the context of the water, energy, food security nexus approach, and on transboundary water resources, opportunities, and challenges in the Arab region. Finally, Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud. Mohammed is the director of the Climate and Water Program and a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. His areas of expertise include climate change adaptation, water policy analysis, and scenario planning. Mohammed has held leadership positions in several organizations, most recently as chair of the Water Utility Climate Alliance, a coalition of 12 of America's largest utilities that collectively provide water to over 50 million people in the US, with the purpose of providing leadership and collaboration on climate change issues that affect water agencies. So I'm delighted to kickstart this discussion, and I would like to start with Roula. Roula, the first thing that I would like to highlight is that we have a number of paradoxes in the region. We happen to have the naturally driest region probably in the world, but at the same time, we have some of the highest water footprint per capita in the world in the region. So this seems quite strange and paradoxical. It seems to be, to me at least, that we have some water achievements, successes in the region. But how can we explain them? Are they fully sustainable? And some of the questions come to my mind. Why is it that some countries do really well? Here in Qatar, for instance, we have water 24/7, but some countries in the region, in the Gulf region, are suffering from a water crisis. Currently, for instance, in the east of Iran, there is a severe water crisis, in the north of Iraq, for instance. So how can we make sense of it? Is it because of climate change in some areas? Is it just because Qatar or some other countries have a lot of oil money and desalination? Is it just about technologies and infrastructure? Can you shed some light on what is ongoing in the region?
Okay. Thank you, Laurent. Good afternoon, colleagues. And I'm really happy to be in this session, and I really like the topic where we are, for a change, looking at what can the world learn from the experience of the Gulf, and what does some of the achievements of the Gulf. I know that there are challenges. I'm not saying all are achievements, but some of the successes can really be good lessons to the rest of the world. Your question, I think that the bottom line is that because of the growth that the Gulf region has experienced, it has naturally increased access, it has increased demand for water. But also, let me start by saying that since the independence in the 70s of the Gulf states, many have made a very serious commitment to providing universal access to water and sanitation, way before the SDGs, even way before the MDGs. And this is really something to be recognized and that has also, with it, have come socioeconomic development, growth, a cascading effect of development. So this has been one of the major push factors for it's water, access to water, that has generated also or has been matched or correlated with development. The other thing is also technology. We have heard throughout the 2 days there have been a lot of emphasis on supply augmentation. So that through desalination, a little bit of treated wastewater, there is still more to be undertaken. There is potential for more, but it's mainly desalination that has played a big role in that. It has, in many ways, so we have seen the region addressing their the basic needs of their population. But on the other hand, the downside of it is that it has raised the bar in terms of the comfort zone. many of the people, and especially the young ones, they don't really know how difficult it is to get this water, how unsustainable it is for the future. And there is a need to work more on the sustainable consumption and production of and in the access to water. In the morning, they were saying, okay, if you ask young children, they will tell you the water is coming from the tap or from this bottle. And there is a need really to understand the challenges of a dire a region that suffers from water scarcity that is amplified further by climate change. And this region is very much affected by climate change, whereas we're talking about a 3 degrees on average global. By the end of the century, this region is likely to have 4 and 5 degrees of a global warming. So it is a combination of factors that have provided the citizens of the Gulf region with the luxury of having access to water, to socioeconomic development. But I think there is a need, a wake-up call with climate change, and the impact of climate change that is beyond the region. When we talk about sand and dust storm, when we talk about access to water, and let's not forget that the water in this region is shared water, it's groundwater, and it comes from outside the region. So you have the ingredients of the 3 ingredients of challenge, where we need to be thinking more about how to better manage the water resources and how to think about sustainability that cuts across all sectors, and we'll get to that later.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much. So there is, if I understood you clearly, there is a trade-off to the success of the Gulf states. To some extent, they have made water so much available that people really don't see it as something quite of a challenge, technologically or industrially to produce. Ziad, you've been working on integrated water resources management for years, decades. How do you see the situation in the region? Do you think that the governments are really achieving a success in terms of integrating their use of different water resources, but at the same time, maybe there is also a trade-off in this success? So could you shed some light on what is ongoing in the Gulf region?
Sure. So when we look at the Gulf region, although we think of desal, that's the first thing that comes to mind, but we need to also look at the other sources that have been in use in the region and have been sort of supporting or have been enabling these environments. But I mean, going back to the climate change and as you said, the impact, I like to think of this region which has an inbuilt resilience, starting with. I mean, when you're looking at this region, it's already a water scarce region. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking in Europe, droughts, this region is one of the most water scarce regions. When we're talking high temperatures are in the 40s. So as an example, and I'm sure Roula can attest to this, we led an initiative at ESCWA, which is the regional initiative for the assessment of climate change impacts on water resources and socioeconomic vulnerability in the Arab region. And one of the things that you do when you're assessing vulnerability, you look at extreme indices.
Yes.
So normally what they do globally is they look at number of hot days, mm-hmm. where the temperature is above 25 degrees. So if you come to the region above 25 degrees, that's beautiful if you come to it. Yes. So we had to come up with indices that look at number of hot days above 35 degrees, above 40 degrees. Mm. So this is, I mean, the level of built in, if you want, resilience in this region. And then that's one aspect of climate change. It's the exposure, the sensitivity, but then you also look at the adaptive capacity, which fortunately this region had the wealth, the economic power to have a very high adaptive capacity. So when you look at the region and you compare, intuitively one would think that the most vulnerable region would be the Gulf, but it's not that. It's the least vulnerable because it has a very high adaptive capacity. Mm. And that has been in the water sector, if you want to think having the advantage of accessing the technologies, having the non-conventional water resources, having the desalination in one part, but also a lot of the governments here are valuing the value of, if you want, thinking of the circular economy of wastewater, treating wastewater and reusing it. There's a lot of policies and a lot of focus in the region on valuing this as an economic source, as a sustainable source, where you're treating wastewater and the region, as Roula said, has one of the best access. If you're looking at SDGs, they have the best access to water services, but also the best access to sanitation and treatment of wastewater. And now they're working more and more to increasing the reuse of that. And they're seeing that as a valuable resource. For example, Bahrain has put a lot of effort on reducing its dependency on groundwater, which was or is being depleted. And so they reduced their water stress level from something around 220%, I think, to 120% in the last 5 years, because they shifted away.
5 years only.
Yeah, they shifted a lot away from dependency on groundwater, depending more on the wastewater use for certain agricultural processes, and also economically using desal in sectors where it makes sense to use that. UAE has done the same, and that's a pattern that we're trying to see a lot in the region, that shift. Also, I mean, there's been a lot of use also of this desal, this extra capacity. In Qatar here, they're using it for artificial recharge. In UAE, they're doing the same. So there is that adaptive capacity that's using this non-conventional water resources, but not in the traditional ways, trying to expand beyond that. And also looking, and I'm not sure if you want to talk about this, not only the supply side, but also the demand management side.
Absolutely. We'll talk about this in a minute. I see Mohammed nodding. So Mohammed, you agree with what Ziad has been mentioning. So would you like to develop?
Yeah, I mean, didn't leave much room to to add on. That was very comprehensive, both Roula and Ziad, but maybe I'll color in the margins a little bit, and bring in sort of a very interesting perspective, maybe a little bit of historical and with climate change, which is the amplification of climate change. If we look at the Gulf region, beyond the GCC, including the GCC, Iraq and Iran, it's very interesting because the amplification of climate change has caused this very paradoxical situation where if you look historically, certainly the GCC nations just are really challenged in terms of water resources, right? If you look at freshwater supplies, it's just groundwater, before we start to even look at the advent of incorporation of non-conventional water supplies. And so from an original perspective, you can see there is extreme vulnerability because, of course, groundwater is a finite resource. And so, therefore, they shifted their need early to non-conventional water supplies, the biggest, of course, being desal. I mean, the primary really is desalination, as Ziad has mentioned. But you look up the coast, so to speak, and as we were chatting earlier, Laurent, you said the historical nations, right, in Iraq and Iran, ancient empires, so to speak, they had the advantage of other freshwater resource, which is surface water, in the case, surface water systems, and in the case running through Iraq, the Tigris-Euphrates system, the birthplace of ancient civilizations. And if you look at that in an original context, that provided them more water security. And for the longest, that river system has been bountiful. But now we look in modern times, an amplification of climate change, the vulnerability has almost reversed between these two groups, right? With the GCC nations early on investing in non-conventional supply, desalination, water reuse, Ziad has mentioned. Even more, other interesting technological sort of forays into things like rainfall enhancement, flagship program in the UAE.
And grey water.
And gray water.
Yes.
So they looked, it was very clear that they had to look elsewhere beyond freshwater to beef those supply sources. But now you look at, say, the Tigris-Euphrates system, there's some very challenging situations in these surface systems because of climate change.
So to me, Mohammed,
Sure.
if I understood you correctly, the GCC probably have a part of their success due to their dynamic approach to water resources development and use. And some other countries which have an ancient tradition of water, hydraulics, etc., may not have been as agile and adapted to climate change. This is an interesting idea. This is an interesting idea because before, when we prepared this discussion, Ziad, you mentioned that the Gulf states have also worked on demand-side management. So not just about providing huge quantities of water for the population, but also working on the demand. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I think, I mean, one of the lessons learned that, and we will be talking more on this, that we can take from the Gulf is when you provide an abundance and there's that shift in the pendulum to an overuse. And more recently, the governments have seen that, and they've worked a lot on the other side. When you're talking integrated water resource management, you talk about supply and demand. And more recently, the governments have seen that this overuse and this abundance needs to be harnessed in. I mean, you need to balance that with the demand side management. And we've seen a lot starting in the 90s, shifting away from food self-sufficiency, for example, and then more recently working on the domestic side. And that was a taboo when you used to talk about the domestic side in the Gulf and saying that you have to use less water. But we've seen that shift in many countries. I mean, we've seen more recently, for example, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in KSA, revised tariff structure, where they have increased the tariff structure for less than 15 cubic meters per month. I think that has they remained the same, but then up to 50, that increased 16 times, 16-fold.
So they try not to penalize the households,
exactly,
but the large consumers probably are the most.
So you're trying to do equity where the people that can't afford it have the same sort of pay level, but the people that use more pay more. That's one of the economic tools that they have used. We've seen that in KSA. You've seen also social tools, like here in Qatar, it's Tarshid, for example, is a program that works on the social tools. You've seen in UAE some economic tools also trying to incentivize the use of treated wastewater in the agriculture sector, where they've given some economic incentives to farmers to go ahead and use. In Kuwait, you've seen legislations that had enforced that the industry and agriculture sector use up to 50%, at least a minimum of 50% of treated reuse. And that has created a demand for treated wastewater, and also has opened the space for the private sector to also work in that field. So what you need is, and what has been shown is, you need a combination of social and economic tools to rein in that demand tools, and that needs to be reinforced continuously, because you can't do one program in 1 year and leave it. And that's what we're seeing more and more in the visions that are coming out, the 2030 vision in KSA, the 2036 vision of water security in UAE. All of these have built-in now components in demand-side management and trying to direct the economic use, the economic value of water, which is something really sort of cutting edge in this region. Economic value, valuing water, putting a value on where to use it. Where do you use a high cost desal water, in which sectors? Where do you use treated wastewater? Where do you use freshwater sources like groundwater? And I think we sort of missed to also include the special case of Oman. And I think they've had excellent traditional management of afflage, which everyone is aware of. And their sort of situation is, they're probably one of the only countries in the GCC where they will have a lot of water in terms of flooding. And that's also something that they have started looking at and improving their systems, how to deal with the flooding that's caused by climate change.
Or well-managed flooding.
Exactly.
Because Saudi Arabia has its fair share of flooding, but so far it's not used to that extent. Mohammed, precisely, you have worked on Saudi Arabia. You know about the underground issues in Saudi Arabia, the water resources issues. Can you elaborate on what has changed in Saudi Arabia especially in recent decades, with regards to how these underground water resources is perceived, changed, maybe new frameworks they have tried to adapt there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue, and it's certainly not unique to Saudi Arabia, I mean, you could extend it to the immediate region, is the recognition of how historically the region has been dependent, ages and ages, on groundwater, and recognizing now with the ability to incorporate other types of non-conventional water supply that it makes a lot more sense to preserve that supply through replenishment, artificial, because you won't necessarily get it through natural replenishment. It doesn't rain as much. The rate of evaporation exceeds the rate of precipitation in this region. And so trying to find innovative ways on how to manage the groundwater in a way that is reflective of that. I want to touch on another thing, maybe a little broaden that up a little bit, and not to speak specifically on demand management, I'm sure, you know, in different sector areas that Roula will pick, certainly in agriculture. But the approach of looking at innovative ways to meet water needs or the output of a water need in a way that is unconventional. And this came up in a few of the conversations, which is this idea of kind of like a resource exchange, where instead of, say, using limited water resources here to provide a certain section of food production, and the one that I think most intensive, which was also came up in a few instances, crops, but specifically crops that is used for livestock, you know, hay or alfalfa, which are most water intensive. And you've heard of this where countries in the Gulf have invested in growing those crops in other parts of the world. Certainly regionally, we've heard places like Sudan, but also in the US. I've heard of the case in Arizona and elsewhere, where going into agreements with folks that have water rights in those particular areas and growing those crops over there and shipping it here. I mean, you can argue in a larger view, it's a little bit more cost effective. It sounds crazy because you have to ship all that back here in the amounts, but if you don't have the supply here as you would like, and you're able to grow the crops there year-round, it offsets some of that vulnerability while still getting the benefit of having that feed for livestock. And that's also possible through sort of the financial resources and capacity to do that.
So this innovation in the field, in the sense that there is a work on changing the demand, to working on the demand, especially for agriculture, which consumes, what, something like 70–80% of the water in the Gulf states. This is something ICARDA works a lot on. Can you, Roula, say what has been, in recent years, the key concern and the key objectives of the ICARDA in terms of demand management, demand-side management?
Well, to start with, I think that the agriculture sector is probably one of the leading sectors where you can really achieve a much better demand management. To start with, at the macro level, of course, many of the countries in the region have moved away, as Ziad mentioned, from food self-sufficiency to food security, but now more oscillating back to maybe food sovereignty and looking at because it's a complex issue, and you don't really moving fully away from food production in the region has also its vulnerabilities. With the war, with the COVID, we've seen the interruption in the food value chain, and also the rural communities that really depend, even though it's agriculture is not very high as a percentage of the GDP, but it employs a lot of people, and therefore one needs to balance all these different dimensions. So from that macro level, there is more concern to rationalize better the food system and throughout the value chain. On farm, there are, and this is one of the ICARDA strong areas, to work on improved irrigation practices, improved better on-farm management of water, and also introducing water, measuring water accounting, water monitoring, water auditing in how much water is consumed in the farms. The other thing, using technology, and here there has been a big improvement in the region, but still more to be done in terms of introducing technology. From early warning system to precision agriculture, to using drones to detect and measure the soil and measure what is needed in terms of the quantity of water needed, and moving more and more away from the flooding approach. The type of crops that are being used, the ICARDA is leading on a number of crops and improving the productivity of these crops. And again here, it's working, and we are all working in a challenging situation, because even with improved water management, we still have lesser productivity because of climate change, because of the evaporation, the salinity of the water. So we really have to work against a challenging situation. But there are key crops that are, for example, Ali earlier mentioned about the cactus, the spineless cactus, the fava beans, the chickpeas, lentils, and some of these, barley, it's a very important, and some of these are very important crops because they can be used with, they are high in water resistant type of crops, and can be used in different in different types of environment, and also they can be used at different seasons, and the whole product, the whole crop can be used. The other thing is investing in more small ruminants, and that are also resistant to heat waves and to water scarcity. There are
Roula, this research, which is ongoing, this is done nationally in a silo, or are there collaborations regionally? How much cooperation is there? How much potential is there for cooperation in this field? Do we have countries in the Gulf region collaborating?
We have, yes, of course. And in UAE, there is the Integrated Desert Farming Initiative that has been adopted by UAE as one of its leading projects, and has been retained for the aim for climate, and as a showcase. And ICARDA is working with its sister organizations like the IFPRI, the World Fish, what else? With our sister organization, but also with ICBA, which is a center based in UAE, to have a model farm that looks at desert farming through a circular, integrated way. But what is most important in looking at that sustainability and introducing technology and looking at the potential for water saving is that it really opens up the sector for a lot of young people, young educated people. It's no longer the vision of the traditional farmer, the elderly who are on the farm, who still use traditional practices. There is a lot to be learned from traditional practices. I'm not saying to move away from that, but there is potential for job creation, for income generation. And this is what sustainability is all about. It's not just water, it's an integrated process where you look at the social implication, the economic implication, and through that circularity that we have. I just want to mention that there are also a lot of interest in looking beyond. I think Mohammed mentioned the virtual water, the issue of investing in other land. I think the Gulf has now has learned a lot from the 2008-2009 crisis, where the Gulf was accused of doing land grabbing. And there is more now a rational way of going about it and looking at win-win situation, studying to what extent this again provides income for the country where you are investing in food production. There is a lot of interest, and this is something very typical for the region, in addressing the food waste and loss. Food loss and waste, and UAE is leading in this. It's going to be maybe one of the key initiatives at COP28. And I would like also to say that at COP28, the presidency has given a lot of interest and backing for a food system transformation that addresses agriculture, food, and contributes to climate action. So there is an interest there is a lot of scope in terms of demand management in the agriculture sector throughout its value chain, not just in the production, but from farm to fork, as they say, and also engaging even with the private sector, with restaurants, with places like this hotel, for example. There is a lot to be said in terms of addressing, improving, if you want, and saving on food loss and waste.
Absolutely. And so we're touching now on the last topic of this 1 hour discussion. And what is really interesting is that now we're contemplating innovative finance also, because we're speaking about innovation, technological innovation, partnerships. There is a possibility in the Gulf region, we've heard that in many conferences, for innovative finance, but also industrial innovation again, and other partnerships, which by the way are also part of the SDGs, which are very important for development perspective of the GCC countries. So Ziad, I turn to you now. How do you see the Gulf states and their, ecosystems, their economic ecosystems, industrial ecosystems? How do you see them as capable of igniting this research, these startups, etc.? Roula has mentioned about this openness now of the agricultural sector, but at which scale, in which directives, which directions? How is it moving forward?
Sure. Maybe if just allow me just 2 quick comments before I forget them. In terms of the growing your products otherwhere, I think we need to also be aware of not just this land grabbing issue, but now more and more with the climate change, that whatever we're growing, that we're not moving our water problem to the other countries. So I think that's a caveat that we should be aware of, that whatever we're investing and growing, that there's enough water there, we're not creating another problem, we're shifting our problem there. And on the subsidies also, and the use of water for the agriculture sector, also important to look at 2 things. One is subsidizing fuel, and that has allowed a low cost, especially in groundwater. And I think we're also seeing this problem now in other parts of the region that has lessened from the region. And also now with the technologies and innovations, the use of renewable energies. Also we're providing farmers with a free energy source. After you install the capex, then it's pumps running freely. So that's something also to just be careful of. If we go back to the role of the GCC, I think I'd like to frame this within, in terms of water and the SDGs and SDG 6, the Global Acceleration Framework for SDG 6. And that talks about several factors. It talks about financing, it talks about data and information, talks about capacity development, it talks about innovation, and then governance. And within that governance, it talks about collaboration. So how does the role of the GCC and their economic situation helps within that global acceleration framework? If we talk about capacity development and innovation, for example, these 2 pillars, I think a lot of the strategies and a lot of the vision that are coming in the GCC countries are putting a lot of resources on localizing innovation, making capacity development part of that innovation. We were just a few weeks, 2, 3, I've lost track now of time, in the MENA Climate Week. And in one of the sessions, we had the head of the, I think it's called the Saudi Water Conversion, Sideline Water Conversion Corporation. And what they're doing there, a lot of innovation on desalination, but they're also have become a capacity development hub on desalination. There were people coming from Europe to learn on this. So that's something to leverage more and more in the region. Gulf countries have been using desalination for years and years, and other countries in the region are just starting to rely more and more. If we look at Morocco, we look at Tunisia, now we're looking at Jordan, going into that field. And I think it's an opportunity for the Gulf region to transfer that knowledge that they have gained over years now, which has made it an off-the-shelf now technology for these countries to give those lessons learned throughout these years. And I've seen that. I mean, in the KSA National Transformative Program, they've budgeted 300 million on localizing manufacturing parts for this desal industry. And you see that in UAE. So that's dealing with capacity and innovation. On financing, there's a huge potential in the Gulf states, as we know and all of us know. There are a lot of funds that are funding water projects. There's the Kuwaiti Fund, there's the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, there's the Islamic Development Bank, there's the Saudi Fund for Development. All of these funds allow countries, middle income and least developed countries that usually cannot access these loans or easily international loans. These funds can be a way for these countries to access much needed financing for their water sector and to advance their water sector. I think in the previous session, somebody was mentioning the sovereign wealth funds. I looked it up. In the GCC, the sovereign wealth fund, the size of that managed portfolio is $4 trillion. So if you look at that size of that sovereign fund, and if there's a will of these countries to direct a portion of that to investment in the water sector, much needed investment in the water sector, that would greatly address, in the acceleration framework, the financing. Collaboration, I think we've seen a lot of collaboration and potential for collaboration of knowledge transfer, of being a broker in this region on deals. And I think these are axes or pillars that the GCC can do a lot of work to accelerate work on achieving SDGs in the rest of the region and globally. And as Roula mentioned, I mean, countries in the GCC are stepping up and taking some roles in the COP. UAE is coming up and they will take the water agenda further in the climate. Saudi Arabia mentioned launching a global water organization just a few weeks back, and that will also look at financing. There's also Saudi Arabia is now bidding for the World Water Forum in 2027. Yes. So there is that momentum of raising the water portfolio in these countries. And that's, I think, is to the benefit of the region and globally, coming from a water-scarce country that really values that water.
Roula, I turn to you now. What would you like to say about this momentum that we see happening in the Gulf now around water being very important as part of the national visions, as part of the SDGs, and also as part of the forthcoming COP in Dubai? Would you like to say something?
Yeah, but let me first just say a few words about innovative finance, because I think it's a beautiful idea, but it's difficult to implement when it comes to the whole portfolio of adaptation, which is really the story of this region. We really need to think about adaptation much more than mitigation. And I think in the morning, either Raha or Natasha mentioned about that 3/4 of finance that comes to the region comes for mitigation, and only like a quarter, and even less for water adaptation. I know it's difficult to measure success. It's much easier to think about how much have you put up solar panels than to really measure the impact of water and having the attribution to climate change. So in that, but there is progress in that, and there are many avenues to look further into. For example, blended finance, where you have part that comes from the private sector and part that comes from international agencies on specific type of project. There is climate for debt swap that ESCWA has had a number now of initiatives in this respect. There are avenues, but I think what is really needed is to look at more accurately in terms of measurements and indicators, and that from the COP perspective, I think that the global goal on adaptation will be a welcomed avenue for looking at, for bringing, opening up a better potential for attracting finance for water projects. Now, on the momentum, I think that the Gulf region in particular has shown a lot of interest, but has been very active in this process. And again, I would like to commend how they have been not just part of the process in terms of hosting different global initiatives that address the issue of sustainability from this different perspective, from the natural resources, the green initiative in Saudi Arabia, the COP now, but also having the Gulf citizens taking an active role. I mean, I have seen the UAE young negotiators really having developing their skills and having a good command of the issues to be discussed. And I think that this has opened the way for bringing better the narrative of the sustainability back into the region. When we started in ESCWA to discuss about, to work with the negotiators on the climate agenda, the issue, addressing the issue of clean energy was almost a taboo. We couldn't even address that. To talk about the private sector involvement in this was also a taboo. Now there is more openness to discuss the transition to clean energy, for example, the better energy mix, and looking at other ways to look at the diversification of the economy. That will really open the way. I know I'm not talking about water per se, but it really is that issue of looking at how the different areas of natural resources management feed into each other. Absolutely. And address the question of water. I think that the question of partnership is very important, and not just to look at partnership among the countries, the Gulf countries, but also look at partnership across different stakeholders, different types of stakeholders. The partnership and better understanding. We speak about the science and the policy-making community, and that it is divorced. There is a need to have a better understanding what language the science people speak and what language the policymakers speak. And there is a big role also for the Gulf to play in terms of pushing for addressing the plight of vulnerable countries in conflict, and this is really a big role that they can play from the avenue of sustainability of natural resources. I know that the question of peace and security will be on the agenda of COP28, and I think it's very welcome in that sense, because without peace and security you cannot achieve really your climate goals. You cannot raise ambition if you don't have a mood of cooperation at the global level.
And precisely, and to finish, we turn to Mohammed, because Mohammed, you work at the Middle East Institute, yes, which is precisely bridging academia, diplomacy, policymakers, and various different stakeholders. So would you like to shed light on this, on these cooperations which are happening, and finish on this matter of partnerships?
Yeah, I want to dive on one thing in particular, because I know Ziad focused a lot on innovation, or focused a lot on the other piece, and I want to, sorry, my brain froze at that moment.
Finance?
Finance, thank you, finance. And I want to talk a little bit more about the partnership. And I think there's an opportunity here in terms of when you think of the countries of the Gulf, beyond the GCC, and when I say the Gulf, I mean the waters of the Gulf, in an area that intersects on water security, addressing climate change, and future vulnerability, which is protecting the waters of the Gulf because it provides multiple benefits. We talked about desalination as being a primary supply source for at least the GCC nations of the Gulf. But I think, and that's a consequence of warming. You need to secure water supplies. But I also think that one of the largest risks to that water resource, if we consider the Gulf as a water supply in that regard, is from climate change, is the warming of the ocean. And so that's going to compromise this region in multiple ways moving forward. When we look at the Gulf, it's more than just a supply source. It's a source of food and aquaculture in terms of fishing and fisheries. It's an important navigation pathway, not just goods and commodities moving in and out. Oil exports, most of the exports coming out of the world, shipment-wise, shipping-wise, is coming out of this region. Another aspect in terms of environmental tourism and recreation, coral reefs, boating, fishing, enjoying nature in that regard. And so there is a risk that without sufficient partnership amongst these nations on protecting the environmental value of the Gulf, a lot of these things could be compromised. When we think about warming of the ocean, and this is further into the future, issues of sea level rise. If there's too much land encroachment from the sea, think about all these desalination plants that are coastal. If those are compromised, now you've lost a critical supply infrastructure that provides the majority of your water supply. Warming of the ocean affects the ability of certain fishes to spawn and reproduce. That's going to compromise a source of food for your area. And then, of course, environmental aspects. And also, that there's an interplay with warming of that water body along with salinity. How does that affect in conjunction with desalination? We talked about brine discharge throughout our discussions. So I think that's it's a low-hanging fruit in terms of opportunity. It's difficult in terms of getting everybody sort of together to cooperate. But I think that's an area where you can address at least a water security angle in terms of desalination and address protection of your critical water infrastructure, as well as your food source that's coming from aquaculture, and then just environmental preservation of fish species, of coral reefs, and then to have the Gulf, the water body itself, continue to provide a recreational environmental value that all nations will enjoy having. So I think that's an area, talk about potential partnership, that could be an area to move forward that provides multiple benefits and protections.
Thank you. On these very interesting words, I would like to thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. I'm sure we could have continued for another hour, but we have to stop here. And I would like again to thank you very much. We will take good notes of all what has been said. This will be used for later on, other discussions and also reporting. And on this, I would like to ask the crowd to give a round of applause to our panel. Thank you very much.
Last 50 years, no? Yeah. What is Thanks. Thank you. Very interesting discussion.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started now on what I will biasedly call the crowning panel of our conference on accelerating environmental action. So environmentalism as we know it began in the 60s and the 70s. We've already heard reference to our first Earth Day that took place. It was 1972 that we got the Stockholm Declaration that said that as humans, we bear a solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. There's a much quoted and somewhat unknown where the source comes from, but comment that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, but borrow it from our children. Now, these are the sorts of things that we've been talking about, right? Since before I was alive, we've had global agreements on these facts, and yet we know that the majority of the emissions creating climate change have taken place since world leaders came together in 1992 and agreed that globally we were going to do something about that. We talk since the early 2000s, we began talking about Earth Overshoot Day. Of course, Earth Overshoot Day this year was on August 10th, but if we look here in the region, my understanding is that it's early February that we hit Earth Overshoot Day each year, which is the day at which we've used up enough resources that the Earth can actually produce in a given year. And so hearkening back a little bit to Malcolm Gladwell's talk, what we clearly need is urgency. And if we think of the somewhat mythical storytelling that he did regarding Steve Jobs and Xerox, in my mind, it is absolutely the younger generation that is going around talking to the older generation saying, do you realize what this means? And the older generation saying, yes, we realize what this means. And it is, in fact, the young generation that is injecting a sense of urgency that's needed. And so with that, we're going to discuss here again how to accelerate environmental action. And we've got a panel of individuals who are themselves young, but more importantly are working with the youth in various youth organizations, various opportunities to empower the young. But and this includes Eman Duwaik from the Palestinian Women Water Network, Ashanee Kottage from the Earth Commons Institute, as well as the Global Lab for Performance and Politics at Georgetown University. Neeshad Shafi, who is a youth fellow at the Wilson Center and earlier was a co-founding member of the Arab Youth Climate Movement, as well as Umaima Ahmed, who is from Georgetown University in Qatar and the former head of the Sustainability Club on campus. And with that, Ashanee, we're going to turn it over to you to tell us a story.
Storyteller. Her grandmother, forcibly expelled from her home and homeland in Al Burj, Palestine in 1948, would tell her stories. And as she listened, Fida would fly with her imagination across borders, across occupation to freedom. And traditionally, women in Palestine told stories in private, not in public. But Fida tells stories everywhere, using them as a tool for survival, to pass on the anthropology of her people, to prove their existence and resistance. She's also a fellow at the Global Lab for Performance and Politics at Georgetown, which is where I met her. And she teaches arts in education, theater, storytelling, for anyone who would like to learn. The following story is inspired by and contains excerpts from Don't You See the Water by Fida Athaya from the We Hear You, A Climate Archive. In this story, I weave my own words with Fida's. I saw my friend in the Gulf of Aqaba. He swam beside me, slender and deep purple, ombreing to pink. We looked at each other, and he stopped swimming, and I saw him again in a trio of lavender corals that looked like my eyelashes, thickened by my grandmother's mascara. And one more time in a bait ball. I waddled around a school, swimming spherically, gazing at its beauty, getting closer as they got bigger. But they were defending themselves from me. I was greedy to keep looking, but I had to avert my gaze, look away, swim away. You ever wanted to just float, just watch? Just north of the Gulf, my story takes place in the Jordan Valley of Palestine. The Jordan Valley represents 30% of the West Bank, and 88% of the valley is Area C. That means that this land is for Palestinians, but is under Israeli military law. When I was working in the valley, making theater with the communities, I heard so many stories from the communities under military law. It made me angry, sad, and even drove me crazy. I thought about the role of artists in situations like this. When I watched the people in the valley tell stories, they cowered. Were they just becoming even sadder by telling sad stories? And sometimes, yes. But what about the Jordan Valley before Israeli military law? One day, my team and I went hiking there, and we found a beautiful salty river with a lot of hot springs. And if you come visit, maybe you can have a bath there or swim in the night in the very hot, salty water. Maybe that's something you've never experienced in your life. And next to the river, in the middle of nowhere, there was a traditional old hotel for people who want to enjoy the water. And on the side of the hotel, there grow many types of grass and wheat. There's even a water mill with a wheel for grinding wheat. The river is a natural resource for all types of birds, animals, and people. I was so happy to discover this place. So I called my friends who lived in Ramallah, Bethlehem, the Hebron area, in refugee camps mostly in the West Bank of Palestine. And I said, come with me. We want to invite you to this place that we discovered in the Jordan Valley. And so they came, a big group of artists. And when they got out of the car, they looked around and said, Fida, where is the water? And I said, oh, don't you see the water? And they said, no. Are you crazy? You can't see this big, huge channel? And they said, we see that, but it's dry. You are here to see the water. We are trying to bring back the life that we lost here. The plants, the animals, the stories, the people, the community. My friends looked at each other, and they looked at me and said, are you just asking us for impossible things? No. I'm asking for every one of us to imagine. Imagine the past, before the military came here. Imagine the salt water, the bathing, and the fun. So together, we imagined. And we also investigated. We went to the community and we asked them about what happened along the river. The people shared amazing stories about the plants and the wheel and the wheat and the flowers and the food and the dance and the songs and the amazing tea from a sweet, sweet spring. About the Cape hare, the Indian crested porcupine, the Dorcas gazelle. All these beautiful things in this life. We also discovered how the Israeli military had planted a huge iron stick in the middle of the spring, and how they would come by every day in a white car to measure the water levels. The local people didn't know what this was. They didn't know what the military was doing to the spring or how to stop them. But day by day, month by month, they kept coming. And then, khalas, the water started to go down and down and down, and then eventually, there was no more water. But sharing these stories, we felt in some ways that we brought the water back. My friends and I created an artistic trail called From Salty River to Sweet Spring, where we invited Palestinians and international guests to come and walk along the riverbed and learn some of its stories, gathering and soaring like the admiral butterfly. However, I never want you to forget that in reality, today, the salty river is empty. There's no water there. And that means that a lot of birds, animals, and plants are running away or disappearing, you know, like the Arabian gazelle, the Buxton's Judd, and Anduin's gull. And a lot of people are disappearing. But to this day, just like the antelope that renews their horns every year, and the army worms who march from one crop to another in search of food, we are still walking, imagining, creating, and sharing our beautiful Palestine. Did you know why the Red Sea is called the Red Sea? She's a deep blue-green until Trichodesmium erythraeum dies. The algae dies and turns the sea brown, red, reddish-brown, like blood from birth, like from deep blue-green to like Kali Amma, red, hair to the floor, crown on her head, garland of skulls around her neck, dagger in one, beheaded man in another. Don't spill, one more to hold the dripping blood and one more to point. Pointing is important. Look at what you've done. And look at what you've made me do. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashanee, for that powerful and sobering story. And to kick off, we're going to ask each of you all a question, allow you to introduce yourself a little bit more, but I want to start with you on the back of that performance. Would you say a little bit more to us about what performance art has to contribute to this conversation? We've heard all of these panels, some of them technical, some of them policy-oriented, et cetera. So how does storytelling contribute to the goals of this conference?
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Ashanee Kottage. I'm a recent graduate of Georgetown University, where I studied science, technology, and international affairs. And I had a minor in theater and performance studies. So what I do now as a fellow at the Earth Commons and the lab is combining exactly these two things. And to me, there's two things that are really powerful about storytelling, period. Tony Cade Bambara says the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I think that's exactly what artists do. They capture your conscience. If you're watching TV or a movie or listening to a song, it has your attention. And I think that's really powerful. And I think it also has the power to personalize things that are incredibly politicized, like including climate change, water issues. Oftentimes they become a lot about the numbers and the data and the statistics, and stories add a human element, add a voice, also including to people, to species and beings that are non-human. So that's the power of storytelling, I think. And performance art in particular, I think, is very alive. It's an element of biology, I think. You'll see a student performance in a little bit, and those were written and devised by the students. They're constantly evolving. When you perform live, everything you see is happening in the moment. The set is being moved, the mic is being put on. It's not something you can pause and move on from. So I think it's really valuable in capturing the heart before you can go to the mind. And I think that connection is really important in affecting behavior change. So yeah, I think that's the value of storytelling.
Absolutely, I love that. And this quote that you gave about the irresistibility that comes from it, right? We're talking here about accelerating environmental action, and we need that. We need that humanizing and irresistible element. Umaima, I'm going to turn to you next and talk a little bit about, here in Qatar, Georgetown is seeking to expand its environmental offerings and what it does, but a lot of students have to date faced what I know you have faced, and that is a great deal of passion for these topics, but perhaps not with as many classes as you might have wanted. So I want to hear, how is it that you have navigated both sort of internal and external resources in order to increase your own understanding of sustainability, and then what advice might you give to others who find themselves similarly placed, caring about these issues, but needing to learn more about them, perhaps if they don't have the luxury of sitting in college classrooms to learn about them?
So hi everyone, I'm Umaima, and I'm a senior majoring in international economics. And I started heading the Sustainability Club in my sophomore year. I started working as the vice president. Then in my junior year, I became the president. And yes, that's an issue that we don't have a lot of environmental courses at Georgetown. But I feel like if you have the motivational drive to learn something, you just make sure that whatever opportunity comes in front of you that's related to your interest, you avail it. And that's essentially what I did. So when I was heading the Sustainability Club, I made sure that I was collaborating with as many organizations as I could. That's how I got to know about Arab Youth Climate Movement, Deep Qatar, and that also sort of acquainted me with the sustainability ecosystem in Qatar, essentially. And once I was done heading the Sustainability Club in my junior year, because you can only do it for 2 years to lead a club, I got interested in research, and that's when I approached Dr. Raha Hakim Diwar, and I started working as a research assistant, and I researched floods in Pakistan, and that really developed my interest in understanding nature-based solutions. And also, apart from that, it's also that if you do any internship, for instance, the internships that I did during the past 2 years, they were related to sustainability, but then there were also some programs that I was participating in that were not really sustainability focused. But I made sure that I was extracting things within those resources where I could learn more about it. So for instance, recently I interned at the US Qatar Business Council, and they have a very corporate approach to doing everything. But I was like, how about I learn about corporate sustainability, the triple bottom line, and that's essentially what I researched there. So just about having the motivational drive, just availing all the resources and learning as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've heard other educators talk about we've reached an age now where all classes are environmental classes, and all jobs are environmental jobs. And certainly that's something that your generation will be immersed in, right?
No,
not just now,
yeah.
but into the future.
No, for sure, because the thing is that green jobs are increasing, and for that you need green skills. And if you are an undergrad student, I think it's the responsibility of the university to make sure that you are learning those skills. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Neeshad, turning to you. You've had some success here in the region, building up organizations, harnessing some of the what we get from our young and helping them to be a constructive player here in the region. And I would like to hear more about your experiences, what advice you have, not just for the young, but for anyone who wants locally to be involved.
Well, thank you, James, for the question. It's a bit difficult in the past, but I think the demography is changing. Young people are equipped with the courses they needed, unlike in the past. Even sustainability was a very cliche in the past here in this region. Now we have a lot of spaces where you talk about climate change and environmental issues from a very pragmatic point of view. Sometimes the issues with the region, especially with the young people, is that sort of tokenistic approach. Like if you want to be an environmentalist, just go to a beach cleanup, you become an environmentalist. So it's very tokenistic, you're action-oriented or very limited. So that's like how Umaima was mentioning, the deep involvement of young people in the environmental issues are kept far away from the discussions, neither in the policy aspect, national building, what has to do with the national policy at international level. This was missing as a large part. So that was something prompted us like 5 years back to start Arab Youth Climate Movement Qatar in a way to bring young people under one umbrella, because there wasn't any organizational setup. And having an organized setup is something we focused from the very beginning, because in the past there were a lot of youth clubs sprouted out, but collapsed immediately because they didn't have the institutional setup, which is officially registered under the state's law. So that was a big barrier for many organizations to come up. I mean, till date, this is the same. But some of the lucky ones like us were fortunate enough to move forward and setting an example to how an organization can systematically work, building the bridge between young people, the government, other civil society organizations. And something AYCM Qatar did was bridging the gap between the region and the globe. We reached out to every NGOs globally. Today, one of the big win for Arab Youth Climate Movement Qatar is that it's one of the known NGOs in the Middle East. That's because we connected outside the box. But we did our work within the box. So we didn't try to replicate anything outside from the West brought to the Arab world. Neither we wanted to sell the hay. But we showed a business model sort of thing, how it works. And I think that model is something many of the organizations within, at least in the Gulf countries, can replicate, that within that box or within that limited area where you can really focus on the work on environment and bring that youth module. I mean, we've been fortunate to be part of the Qatar's national delegation. Why? Because we did substantial work on the ground here, which is recognized by the state end of the day, and they get a bigger role to, come and showcase what they've been doing locally at international summits like COPs. So I think the big learning lesson is not to think very small, but look at a bigger picture and try to do something that fits the culture, the region, the people. That's the big win. You don't have to bring something from elsewhere and try to fit in here. And that was a big failure in many of the people who've been doing in the past. And still people are continuing. And this is my takeaway. And the bottom line is do something that fits to the local ecosystem. And that will succeed because you will get the support.
Right. Thank you very much. And Eman, turning to you here, maybe speak a little bit more about what you've seen. What are some of the main environmental risks and challenges that particularly face women and young people in Palestine today? Given, especially, it's such a sensitive topic and context at the moment, but I would love to hear not just what you've seen and learned there, but also how we can support and leverage the role of gender and youth in order to maintain a peaceful transition to sustainability in the area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, regarding the challenges and risks that women and youth face in Palestine, Palestine is a kind of different case since it has been in, it's known as to be a conflict zone for many years. So the environmental pressures that that impact women and youth, it is known that that Palestine environment is facing many challenges as drought levels are increasing. It is expected to increase from 2 to 5 degrees, which will cause many also destructive, it will cause like more, sorry, I'm kind of,
it's okay.
It will cause more less, it will cause less land for agriculture. Also, it is known that the rainfall will increase from 10 to 20%, causing less clean, less clean water, to have access to clean water, and will also destruct the crops. Now, all that has also direct impact on women and youth, since they are known to be the vulnerable groups in Palestine. Now, how is that? The Palestinian society is known to be an agricultural society, where women, where their main income resources of women is from agriculture. So when there is no access to agricultural land and no access to clean water, so then they are exposed to these environmental pressures and problems. And here comes the importance of taking mitigation strategies and resilience plans to avoid this situation.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about the Palestinian Women's Water Network and how it came about and what it's seeking to do in this context.
Well, the Palestinian Women Water Network, it is a network that is 3 years old. It's new and a new network. It is hosted by the Palestinian Hydrology Group and founded by the Kavina Til Kavina Foundation. The organization is a Sweden organization, and it focuses on women's rights all over the world. Now, our main focus in the network is to make women voices count by different actors on the local and regional and international level, as we also focus on promoting Palestinian women professionals in order to participate more in the making decision level and the policy making level, in order for them to have the ability to raise women and youth environmental and water problems, which I guess the main problem is to obtain to having access to clean water and environments. That is the main focus of the network. The network works with all women in all segments. When we say all segments, we mean the rural and agriculture women, we mean household women, we mean also professional women and expert women in the water and environmental sector. And we also target the student females and female engineers, graduates. We also have certain programs for them. So the network in general works on empowering women in the environmental and water sector.
Thank you. Thank you. So we just want to remind everyone, of course, you know by now that you can submit your questions there via the QR code for our panel. And Ashanee, I'm going to come back to you, back to this idea of storytelling a little bit. We heard from Malcolm Gladwell. He emphasized the importance of framing and of sharing kind of the urgency that we have in a manner that others can receive it. And so talk to me a little bit more about the role of positive storytelling as a means of educating others, both with regard to the substance of environmental issues, but also, as you were mentioning earlier, just a deep way of communicating urgency.
One of my favorite ways to demonstrate the importance of positive storytelling is by talking about ocean optimism. It's an emerging subfield in academia, and it espouses that positivity and sharing successes is actually strategic. So it's not a type of toxic positivity or a foolishness, but it's a way to share these success stories and examples of things working and going right as a way to secure political capital, buy-in, financial capital, and all of that, because currently in the media and entertainment, everything about the environment is very doom and gloom. But as a result of that, there's no hope. And when there's no hope, people don't want to try. So I feel like resignation is a collateral damage of this type of apocalyptic storytelling of the world is going to end and we have no hand in fixing it or helping solve it. But things are improving. There's rare sea turtles that are smashing nesting records in Georgia. Atlantic corals are spawning. There's also intangibles like more people of the global majority, Black, Brown, Indigenous people, more women being involved in the decision making, but also in panels and conferences like this. So there's a lot of things that are improving, and Ocean Optimism talks about sharing these stories. So both in academia, but also in entertainment, and hopefully in the classroom as well, where we're not just looking at problems, but we're also looking at examples of solutions that have worked.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of it with my students. I once had a student who came into the class, and we were talking actually about some of these positive developments that had happened, and he said, well, actually, I'm a realist. And by realist, he meant he was a pessimist, right? We had a good conversation about this, but this has been something that's been important to emphasize. If you are a realist, then you really are attuned to the positive developments. If we look at where we're at and what we're facing today, it's a much better outlook than just 10 years ago when you look at the charts and the graphs and such of where climate change is headed. So I think that's a critical element. And I think it relates also, Neeshad, you brought up before, right, this opportunity here locally to work. You mentioned working within the box, and I heard two things from that, right? Both working kind of within the social structure as it's set up, but also being attuned to local opportunities and possibilities that exist here, as opposed to looking for models from outside and trying to import them. I would love to hear you be really pragmatic for a moment, if you would, and think about in your work to try to empower youth. What have you seen really work? When have you felt like the young have genuinely been empowered and not, as you mentioned before, merely tokenized?
I mean, it comes with knowledge, like our colleague Bandis mentioned. the anxiety issues, which have been very well discussed in the West, it's not a concern here. We did some surveys recently. Nobody gave a thought about like it's a thing. Like this, yeah, I want to take an action, but I don't think it's doom and gloom. I think positive things happen. And if you look at the education background of people who answered those questions, are graduates and postgraduates. So, and if we look at the age group, they are 25 to 30. So this gives the number of people actually comes with the background, really understand the dynamics of climate change. And they feel there is a big hope that the transformation is still possible. But I never felt within the region there has been quite a big discussion around mental health and climate. I recently see a lot of discussion happening, which was not part of. And that is a good thing because we've been hearing a lot of burnouts with young people who are part of the climate movement within the region. But again, coming back to the context here, what is something missing is that really empowering people with the right knowledge, not mere academic, because academic thing stays in academic and with the paper. But what you really want to build is that paper with a real world knowledge. Like you get to see, feel it, what's happening. Like the other day you were mentioning, you were going to find the whales, and the stories about sea level races you have to show in real. Because people used to quote still in these days in this part of the world, what's climate change is flooding in Bangladesh and forest fire in California. Now we have flooding in our own nations here, and we won't show loss of lives in some of the countries here. Forest fire is as close as in Lebanon and in Turkey. So those real examples are coming closer and closer. That means we are getting the impacts of climate change are very real and faster than we thought. And also that people start realizing, oh, these things are happening now in a very technical way. They understand the topic. So if you look at that real part of people who are part of the real conversation are the real people with the knowledge, and they're the one who really want to join this sort of movement. Even if you look at the members in many of the organizations in this part of this world or our organization are mostly students from the science and environment background. Half of the students in the programs are environmental science students from Qatar University. I don't find somebody coming from computer science and joining. We welcome everybody, but that shows that people equipped with the knowledge feel like, hey, I have something to do and I have a say there. So I think we try to take the science outside the environmental science students' portfolio so that we bring rest of the people together.
Yeah, and this remind me. This gets back to what we were talking about earlier, Umaima, about making sure that we have the classes, right? Making sure that we're getting this education, we're getting this out. Sort of staying on this topic a little bit with regard to a kind of paternalism or tokenism that can happen, Eman. I would like to ask you, as we seek to incorporate women and youth in the goal, with this goal that we have of genuinely empowering them, how can women and youth be more integrated into the system of climate governance rather than merely sort of be picked as a mere token or as a mere symbol of the fact that we're trying to incorporate women and youth?
Yes, well, as the network, we do deal with all women and all levels. It is very important to assure that participation of women in water governance and also environmental issues. So that's why we try to create programs and activities that help them to have the right skills and abilities and knowledge of their right for water and for right to have a clean environment. Also, it is very important us to in this situation to gather all stakeholders in under this platform or this network where they could dialogue and discuss safely their needs and wants as women and their rights, so that the top level management could hear them, or the Palestinian Authority can hear them, and by that we could it could be more included in the Palestinian Authority agenda. When we talk about water and environment, or when we talk about gender-related issues, we also focus on capacity building for professional women that work in the water and environmental sector. As we also work on the female students, graduate students, especially the ones that do have like the eager to know more about water and environment and also diplomacy and policy making. So we try to connect all these stakeholders together, where they could exchange knowledge and where they could hear each other, and then based on that, we do our environmental strategies are created within a gender perspective, including women and youth in these strategies and policies.
Absolutely. So that critical feature of capacity building has to be there, and you've been able to do that. Umaima, I'm going to turn to you again. So we've heard a whole lot about water. We know the precious commodity that it is. We know how important it is with the various issues that we've discussed: security, biodiversity, food security, the COP28 goals. It's an enormous challenge. And at the same time, it is also one of the consequences. Somebody else earlier today said that if climate change is a shark, then water is the teeth. And I think we've seen that in Pakistan here recently. And I know you've done a lot of research around the flooding in Pakistan and some of the challenges that are there. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned?
So, first of all, the research was, I think, one of the things I did that really allowed me to like push myself out of my comfort zone, because it wasn't just about reading different publications, but I also got exposed to a lot of data, GIS, and these are some of the things that I didn't know about earlier. So this research was very critical in helping me understand not just floods, but also the broader part of climate change. So talking specifically about floods in Pakistan, yes, water has obviously been one of the major issues, but of all the things that have happened and that have led to floods, I think governance was the major issue, and how the mismanagement of resources by the government led to these catastrophic floods that submerged 1/3 of the country underwater. So I can just give you a few examples. For instance, the groundwater resources are depleting at a rapid rate in Pakistan. And that's because almost every other farmer who can have access to tube wells, they have tube wells on their lands, and tube wells are very good at pumping out water from the ground at a very rapid rate. So that's leading to a depletion of groundwater resources. And that is also where governance is not playing, or the government is not playing like a massive role in helping farmers realize that this can be a major potential issue that can also impact your agricultural produce in the future. Then also other things, for instance, we have 3 major dams that are regulating the flow of water in Pakistan. And sedimentation has been such a major issue that has actually reduced the capacity of these dams to hold water. And the governments are not doing anything on that. And what are the other examples I can give? Also, so we have some organizations, like we had some conventions, like the Indus Water River System Authority and different accords. And most of these conventions are heavily dominated by one party or one specific province. So that province has a lot of agency as to how they can control the water flow and how they can control different resources that are related to agriculture that are very important to securing livelihoods of people in Pakistan. So governance has been a major issue. That is something that needs to be addressed. And what was the other question? It was about governance, right? Governance of water. Yeah. So governance has been a major issue, and the mismanagement of resources based on that.
So this goes along with one of the questions that we've gotten in, and again, remind everybody, please share your questions that you have. But there's a question about technology and how do we leverage technology in order to create greater water sustainability. And your answer there, Umaima, brings up, we've got 2 key issues, right? One is technology itself. What technologies are you excited about, or do you hope get developed? But as we know, it's not merely about technology, as we've been hearing from the beginning, right? We have expertise, we have technology that's been developed, we've got implementation issues, we've got governance issues, we've got this issue of social risk and the need to inject more urgency into the discussions. And so opening it up to whoever would like to sort of take up this question concerning technology and what's needed.
I'd actually like to share 2 technological resources that are related to storytelling. So Fida's story was a part of this a digital archive called We Hear You, a climate archive, which commissioned 77 young storytellers. And it's a fairly simple process in that we met over about a year in these Zoom sessions and just offered prompts, and the storytellers would simply tell a story. And then we transcribed them, and now it exists on this amazing digital archive. Similarly, there's an organization called Climate Change Theater Action that commissions plays, short plays, just 5-page plays, again, from around the world. And again, those plays exist online in this digital database. And educators can use them, performers like myself can use them. And it's an open resource for anybody to take these stories and use them as they will under, of course, making sure that we're crediting them and other guidelines. But so they exist online, and it's amazing because it's simple and accessible, and it also means that you can use them in so many creative ways. I'm not Palestinian, I'm from Sri Lanka, but I'm able to role play and take on a story and share it as a performer because it exists in this digital archive. But also a lot of the work that I do is on decolonizing how we communicate science. And we're always looking for an innovation, the next best solution, the silver bullet of technology. But when you think of storytelling, our ancestors have been telling stories for eons. And even just today in one of the breakout sessions, we were talking about ancient Sri Lankan tank cascades that are incredibly valuable in mitigating human-elephant conflict, in providing water for irrigation, for agriculture, but they've been neglected because everybody's obsessed with the newest technology. So I wanted to draw both those things. There's amazing resource such as the internet, but also to think about what are ways of our past that we can return to.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So in my job, I deal with educational technology and talking with faculty about how to improve teaching and such. But I always tell people that the most amazing piece of educational technology that we have ever invented is the blackboard or the whiteboard of today, right? Very sort of low tech and yet so critical and crucial to pass down information as our stories. Any other thoughts on this question of technology?
Yeah, on the storytelling. With our organization here, we started recently Young Reporters Program to basically share the local stories. And with the tech comes another part, is that the accessibility of data. We have the tech, but where is the data? That's a big part. So what we try to do is with this program is to basically equip young people to ask those burning questions like, okay, I've been looking at this waste here. I mean, anybody have the data? How much has it been coming every day? So we've been working in a couple of schools who have been looking at amount of waste generated per home, and they want to know what's the data per every homes in the country. So that sort of curiosity is generated, and to find the data is not easy. So I think tech plays a good role. The young people who are using some sort of an app which we created to do this data collection thing. So the idea is to basically use tech with, I say common sense, to find what we can do in reducing our small level of impacts at a very household, family level actions, which accounts very big. But it starts from there, and that sort of curiosity we need to generate within young people at a very young level. So Young Reporters for Environment is a great program we've been working on, supporting young people to develop that storytelling, critical question asking, and making sure they develop this sort of curiosity from a very young age. Not only they document this, but also they start working on that. So that's the idea how I think we can convert storytelling, tech, and environment.
I would also like to add regarding integrating new technologies in the water environmental sector. It's very important. The network supported about 11 new initiatives that had new technologies for females who worked in the water environmental sector, both in Gaza and West Bank. These initiatives were very successful. They also helped the females to generate new income sources for these initiatives. It's also very important because in Palestine, for the water scarce, we have to think out of the box and have to have new ideas how to find new ways to how to have clean access to clean water and agricultural water, and also So the new technology is very important, I guess. That's what we are working on also in the future steps in the network.
Yeah, so and then the deployment and thinking outside of the standard lines in order to do that. So I'm gonna, because of time, I'm actually gonna combine two questions that we've just received. One about how to successfully mobilize climate action here regionally, and another about the youth voices that have recently been elevated at COP28. So we heard in the last panel there are youth delegates, right, that are being embedded within the COP28 sessions. And sort of sticking on some of these themes that we've already touched on regarding tokenism, I want to, if you were to imagine either that you were one of those youth who's embedded in the COP28 proceedings, or you were one of the youth who weren't selected to go, but nonetheless you want locally to be involved. What advice would you give to anyone in either of those situations in order to try to make a difference, in order to try to accelerate environmental action? Umaima.
I think the most important is believe in yourself. And I think youth has a lot of potential to make impact. I feel the major issue is that the entire climate governance system is adult-centric. And the young people, they find it hard to be empowered as decision makers. And I can understand it, because if it's an adult-centric place, then it comes with some preconceived notions about the capabilities, about the age, about how much the youth can exert. But I think youth actually has the potential to do a lot if they're given the resources. And I can give you my example. Like when I was researching floods in Pakistan, I had the motivation drive to learn about floods, but it was because I was given the resources. I was trusted by my mentor that I can actually do this. So I did it. I accelerated in it. So I think you need to trust them. You need to give them space and the resources. These things are very important. And also I think it's important because once you achieve something as a young person, that reinforces your motivation, and then you want to do even more. So I think it's about trusting, believing, and all the positive attributes you can think of.
Yeah, and you raise sort of this idea of that social element of risk, right? When you have an adult space and it's just understood, here's how the norms work. It might not even be explicit or laid out, but that is one of the things that I think youth have to overcome sometimes in those situations.
Even when we think about the three characteristics that Malcolm Gladwell outlined yesterday, creative, conscientious, and disagreeableness, I think that last one is complicated because it comes with a lot of privilege. Who is allowed to be disagreeable and who has lost opportunities because they were disagreeable. But I think for youth, women who have been trained our whole lives to be polite and make ourselves smaller and think within a box and to be diplomatic, I think it's more important now more than ever to think radical, to be loud, to be disagreeable, even when it may be difficult, when it may be tragic. And this goes back to, again, why technology is an asset for us and our generation, because it connects us across oceans, across borders, and there's a sense of solidarity. Neeshad was talking about mental health. There's so much climate anxiety. And what each of your networks do, what we are doing in places like this, and what social media and the internet allows us to do is to connect across this and have a sense of solidarity, but also be able to elevate our voices. If you are disagreeable and you face backlash for that, how can you leverage your internet presence, your global presence to counter the backlash? So I think those three characteristics are particularly important for our generation and people who haven't been allowed to be creative, conscientious, or disagreeable in the past.
Fantastic. And that's a fantastic segue to our last question that I'm gonna pose to each of you. And that is just that, my entire life, I've heard the mantra, and everybody uses it on all sides, that what we really need to do is we need to do this for the young, right? For those that are unborn. And there's a very real sense in which the youth of today, the youth that you are, or in the organizations that you're attached to, just are who we've been describing. And to be candid, humanity has failed to take reasonable action on these issues to date. And instead, we're burdening our young with enormous burdens that they will be dealing with for the rest of their lives. So my question, which gets at what you were beginning to talk about there, Ashanee, is how do we make sure that we aren't paralyzed or sinking into despair, but instead pressing forward with, as Gladwell said, right, the kind of conscientiousness, the creativity, and the urgency that we need? Well, Eman, if you don't mind, we'll start with you and we'll just go down the line.
Well, I believe that whenever we can engage the youth in the environmental and water issues as they are young, in this way, especially in the educational systems, this way that we could make it more friendly for them to like acknowledge the whole situation, and giving them also ownership by young ages also encourages them, or it also allows them to to participate more in such issues and topics regarding the water and environmental issues. So I think so that knowledge and the right education for the youth will help them to acknowledge what is going on in the universe, and to give them ownership from a young age, because in the future they will be the ones who will be making the decisions and leading the situation. So I guess that will make it much more easier for them to acknowledge the whole situation, and as I said, take accountability and ownership of the situation. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll say two things. One is that I think it's incredibly important for us to continue to foster a sense of ecological belonging. As you know, I had an insane journey getting here. I was traveling for about 2 days, but as soon as I left the airport, I saw swarms of bougainvilleas beside the roads. And bougainvilleas are found in Sri Lanka, which is my home. They're found in Egypt and LA, and so many places that I've had good memories in. And when I see bougainvilleas, I know I'm gonna have a good time. I'm gonna meet some good people. It's gonna be a positive experience. And that is my way of connecting to my ecology and my surroundings. And even just yesterday at the end of the proceedings, walking along, just like dipping my toes in the water and the ocean. So I think getting us out there. I don't know how much we can achieve being in AC rooms, discussing climate and discussing water issues and energy issues. So yeah, continue to foster a sense of ecological belonging. But also in thinking about the past. I belong to many dharmic traditions, and we don't believe that time is linear. Time is circular. So I feel ancient. I'm 23, but I feel ancient, and it's because I come with the wisdom, the mistakes, and all of it of my ancestors. And I believe that in my presence, I'm a combination of the future, the present, and the past. So I think the more we can think of time as circular also is another mindset approach, and thinking of what can we learn from the past and deploy in the future, which is also in a way our past and our present. So those are the two things that I hope to see more of.
Thank you.
Well, young people are now better motivated to me. At least they've been asking the difficult question to their parents or their older generation. And I still find a good part is where the intergenerational dialogues. Not talking to your father, but you're talking to your grandfathers who really share those wisdom of how they lived. So we want to share about a workshop we did recently with teachers, grandparents, and students at Musharraf Museums here to really understand how the parents led the life against their grandparents. So there was a very contrasting lifestyle, especially in Qatar at least, the way they lived, they were consumed. So bringing back to how they lived in the past. I mean, of course, like if you look at time is linear or circular, they will reach back to a point that within the giving the current situation, they will enjoy what they used to be in the past. But young people are really motivated. I see they're coming up, asking the hard questions, and also on the COP questions I want to touch base. Now young people having spaces which is not used to be in the past, like children and youth pavilion exclusively given for young people, a great space for discussion. And COP is no more, again, exclusive for only to adults. They're also making the space for young people. The program started by young people themselves, making sure they support other young people who are not privileged enough to go there. Like Arab Youth for COP was a recent initiative started to help young people to get into COP, especially from the Arab region where most of the countries don't support young people from their national delegation, or their countries are in shambles. They're not able to ever reach there. For example, from Yemen or Libya or Syria, people are not ever able to travel. Visa restriction or other restriction puts them not able to go. But I think young people are coming together to make sure you bring them all together. And that's like a sort of a collective action I see. There's a tapping from one another to another shoulder from the region, which I really see. It's a great momentum which is built globally. And I see that sprouting out in the region as well, beyond the political lines. So I think that's the positivity we should really support and look forward for.
So I'm just going to emphasize and expand a bit on my earlier point. So we need to empower youth as decision makers. So we should make sure that in the public sector, private sector, they are given the responsibilities of doing preliminary research, policy formulation, agenda setting. But then when it comes to COP28, it's a very global platform, right? And what you need to understand is that youth is not a homogeneous entity. Everybody has had very different experiences of climate change. Somebody in Pakistan who has experienced floods is not going to have the same perception of climate change as somebody who has experienced droughts. And as a result, they're going to have very different philosophies of climate change. So if I go to COP28 and I say that I'm representing Pakistan, the youth of Pakistan, that won't be very fair, because everybody has very different experience when it comes to climate change. So that is one thing that needs to be realized and asserted a lot. And based on that, I think the more you empower youth on a local level, the more impact that is going to have. Actually taking into account how different people around the world are experiencing climate change, that is important.
Absolutely. Well, I will just close by saying that it's been one of the real privileges that I've enjoyed, that I every day get to work with the young. That is where my hope, my ability to stave off paralyzation or despair, right? But be truly energized and move forward and try to accelerate this work comes from. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be going into the next phase of our program and nearing the end, but I'd like everyone to please stay in the room, and we're going to have a very special performance to follow that very important and special panel.
Like start having a sip of water. God, I wish you were singing. No, when we walked in. I don't know. I'm also I'm doing one man show. It's just her, actually. Is that your connection?
Hello, welcome back. My name's Derek Goldman. I'm a faculty member at Georgetown on the Washington, D.C. campus. I know we're winding into our closing time. I just want to say personally what a energizing and inspiring event this has been. My role at Georgetown, I'm a faculty member and I direct an initiative called the Laboratory for Global Performance in Politics. You heard a little bit about it from Ashanee, who's part of our team. It's a joint initiative of the School of Foreign Service and the college or the Department of Performing Arts with a mission to humanize global politics through the art of performance. And we're unusual as a kind of arts and humanities initiative in a leading school of international relations. And we also have this really vibrant partnership, as again, Ashanee kind of spoke to and embodied with the Earth Commons around the intersection of arts, humanities, narrative, and the environment. And I just want to say how moving it is, having done this work, as we come to the end of this really kind of radically, not only cross-cultural, but interdisciplinary gathering, and sort of how amazed I am not only by what Raha has put together, but the vision of Dean Masri here in Doha and Dean Peter Mara and the faculty to not only bring together the scientific and kind of policy communities and humanitarian communities in a radical way, but to make space for the role of human narratives, which I think even from the keynote by bringing Malcolm Gladwell here, he spoke to briefly. So I'm just gonna, Ashanee was more articulate, I think, than I could ever be about why story, why we have invested in this particular, together in this particular intersection. But I wanted to be Gladwellian for a moment and talk about, as he often does, about how human beings are hardwired. And on one hand, we are really, as human beings, we're story machines. We're wired to connect through stories and narratives. And yet when we come into spaces like this, we have a tendency to kind of become conference attendees. We have the capacity to sometimes forget that we're sitting among fellow human beings who have all come here for reasons that are at some level personal. We have stakes that are rooted in our personal and familial histories, in our memories, in our longings, our losses, our experiences with water, our childhoods, crises that we've witnessed or endured, things that we love and value that are embedded in these relationships. These are the things that make us who we are, that make us human, like water itself. They're kind of what we're made of, but what we sometimes take for granted. And often they go uncovered. And so by making space for exactly this kind of work, the kind of performance that Ashanee shared an hour or so ago and what you're about to see, we're kind of reminding us of that current. And it often doesn't happen at events like this. So I want to just share a little bit of like, so why is this theater guy here? That's part of why. So we, as you're about to find out, have this really remarkable cohort of Georgetown students who've been part of this event and who are here both from main campus. They competed in a very intensive application process to be part of being brought here. and from the campus here in Doha. So already what is really exciting is the space being carved out for those students to form a cohort and build relationships with each other. And they just met in person, or all of us met together for the first time yesterday. We had a Zoom with some of them and had an hour or so together. But as you'll see, they are these are not people who identify as performance students, but they're going to work together to use story and the story of encountering each other as a way to share out what brings them here. And I know you're going to be moved and intrigued by all the things that brought them here, but by extension, I hope it also reminds each of us that there are our own reasons, our own stories, our own backgrounds that are bringing us together in this space, that unless you maybe run into someone in the lobby or in the elevator might otherwise go undiscussed at an event like this. Because I think with those stories in hand, we're better equipped to address what's at stake with the urgent issues that we're all gathered here to discuss. And I think you'll agree that we're in very, very good hands with the young people you're about to meet. So without any further ado, here's the student cohort sharing some of their own stories and perspectives. Friends, here you go, bring your water bottles.
Water is life.
La agua nos da la vida.
L'eau est la vie.
Voda yi život.
पानी जिंदगी है. पानी जीवन हो.
Water is life. Tu bigay boy.
الماء حياة. 水是生命.
逝者如斯夫.
My name is Sierra.
Sierra.
Sierra is from a small area in Alaska called the Kenai Peninsula,
where my family lives.
She's a master's student in the School of Foreign Service.
She's also signed with the U.S. State Department as a Foreign Service officer and will be starting her service soon.
Okay, so I was trying to think about water from an Alaska point of view. We get our water from primarily groundwater, and I think Alaska's very lucky, as there's always jokes about if the world were to collapse tomorrow, Alaska would be fine.
If the world were to collapse tomorrow.
Because Alaska has many of its own resources, oftentimes it's used as a place where resource extraction happens. But that is only in the southern communities. That's not the case up in the northern areas of Alaska, where it's primarily indigenous communities. These communities are dependent on unreliable imports arriving by small planes and sometimes ships. I also think about it from a Washington, D.C. point of view. I know that our capital primarily gets its water from the Potomac River, which is kind of funny because in D.C. people always make jokes about how polluted the Potomac River is. And I know, like along with a lot of other people, either use water filtration systems or we buy our own water because at least in my building, our pipes are over 100 years old and they have lead in them.
We buy our own water.
So I find it interesting because an American narrative is often that Americans have so much environmental security that they don't need to think about it. Most people that I know in DC do filter their water in some way, and that's the nation's capital. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
My name is Leo.
Leo comes from China, from Wuhan and Beijing, and he's studying here in Doha.
But let's not forget my real name is Zheng He. Can everybody repeat after me? Zheng He. Yeah, it sounds really narcissistic because I'm basically letting a lot of people call me my name, but actually it's also the name of the greatest navigator in Chinese history. He brought giraffe to India and Africa. So it's a little funny fact, and you guys could know that. And also it's because as the greatest navigator in history, in Chinese history, he traveled through water. And that's what happened to my family. Water can connect us and give us energy.
Water connects us.
My family history is the best illustration of this statement. My family came from Hubei province, which is a central province in China, famous for its abundance in water. And basically, during the World War II, when the Japanese invasion came, our family had to flee the city we lived in. So through the Yangtze River, our family moved to the southwestern China. And it's a very dangerous adventure, but they made it through the gift of water and through its mobility. And also a very great coincidence that my family moved from Hubei province to Beijing through the biggest project in Chinese water history, in modern Chinese water history specifically, is the Water from the South to the North project. Because in China, the southern water is very abundant, but in north it's very dry and drought. So people have to transport and transfer water from the south to the north. And water help our family to immigrate.
Water helps us.
And guess what now? Now I'm living in Qatar, a place surrounded by water. So what else could I say? Enjoy a cup of water in your hand, inshallah.
My name is Anupa.
Anupa is a second-year student at Georgetown, Qatar, and she's studying international economics.
She's originally from Gorkha, which is a district in western Nepal.
So during my childhood years, I grew up in Gorkha. So Gorkha is in the western side of Nepal, and it's a very green place, full of water resources like rivers and lakes. However, during my teenage years, I had to move to the city, the capital city called Kathmandu, where my experiences to water were very, very different, mostly due to the underdeveloped water supply. And hence, I always wanted to learn what this barrier to access of water are and how can they make differences in the experiences.
This is why she joined this conference.
When I moved to the city area, we had to buy water every time for daily essentials. Every 15 days, my family had to pay for a tanker of water. So that was when I realized, even though my country is so rich in water, there's no access for the citizens. In fact, I remember during Sunday morning, me and my sister standing in a long line just to get 2 buckets of water and waiting for the routine. And sometimes we had to return empty bucket because the routine had already finished. So at that point, I sort of realized how valuable water can be.
How valuable water is.
And now, when I'm in Doha, I don't feel the same sort of connection. In fact, I'm very disconnected to the source of water.
Very disconnected from where the water comes from.
Partly because I easily get the water in the tap without any effort. I don't have to stand in the long line in the glaring sun like I used to do in the Saturday morning every day. So now I'm sort of even disconnected what the source of my water is, mostly because of the privilege that I have right now in Doha. But now I sort of realize how important it is to be grateful of the access that I have and be connected more to the source of the water.
Hi, I'm Jack. So I'm from Sagaponack, New York, which is a town on eastern Long Island. And so when we think about water, a lot of times we think about it like this, which is something that we as humans over thousands of years have become experts at controlling, changing, commoditizing. So I'm fortunate to come from a town that's extremely water abundant. So we have the Atlantic Ocean. I grew up in the ocean with the bay, with ponds. And my earliest memories that have to do with water are not with how to control it, but rather how to live in harmony with water and especially with the ocean. So as a kid, some of the earliest lessons I learned were how to brace your house for a hurricane, how to, why not to walk on sand dunes because of what they provide for erosion reasons. And especially what to do when you get caught in a rip current. Why not just swim against the current? And I think that a lot of the times when we think about water, we forget about this relationship that we have with it. And I certainly didn't realize what this relationship was until I left home, first to go to boarding school, then to Georgetown, and soon somewhere else. Because every time I left, I found myself subconsciously wanting to go back to it, whether that was going for runs on the river, trying to find lakes or bodies of water to sit by, read by, whatever it was. And I could never really escape this need to go back to the ocean. And every time I returned home on a break, it would always be a source of healing. And I realized it's because even though my life was constantly changing, the ocean was something that was always constant, and it always provided this constant state of calm. And when we think about water and we think about it like this, it's easy to divorce ourselves from it and forget about this relationship that we all share with it. It's an intimate, very personal relationship, and it's something that we all have. It's something that's existed in every single culture and every single person that's ever lived, and something that's never going away. So.
My name is Nicole.
Nicole.
Nicole is from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is by the Rockies.
She's in the first year of a master's program in School of Foreign Service and specializing in international water conflict management.
Yeah, so I have a unique relationship to water. I come from a landlocked province, but I also experienced flooding from rivers growing up. I've done a bit of traveling at the same time to both the Arctic and the Antarctic region, which influenced my perspectives on water. I think it's fascinating, just no matter how you're influenced by water, it seems to affect your life in so many different ways.
So many different ways.
On a personal level, coming from the Rocky Mountains, at a young age, I would hike in the mountains, nearby glaciers, and I'd have my parents tell me that this is effectively where my water is coming from. And we would travel, and I would see bottled water from the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And so I guess I just had this concept that I would be able to just fill up my water from a running river in the mountains. I was just very aware of where my water source came from, and it felt very safe. But then at the same time, I traveled from a young age, and we would go to Asia, and then I'd be told that I couldn't drink the tap water because it was unsafe. And so it was very similar to many of the stories, I guess, a dichotomy of privilege.
A dichotomy of privilege.
And being able to access it so easily from where I'm from, but then go somewhere else and really struggle to access it, and to see that it comes at such a high price just to have basic drinking water.
Such a high price.
Then I also saw the insecurity side of it, the danger that comes from living so close to water sources. I would experience floods living near a river, and so every single year, you just kind of see what happened with rainwater levels and how the runoff works that season, and you would watch the river rise and lower, and every year it was kind of like, okay, are we gonna have to evacuate this year? And eventually we did. We had a major flood in Calgary, Alberta in 2013. My family home was flooded and we had to evacuate.
We had to evacuate.
And so it was this weird experience, I guess, of feeling very safe, that I was close to accessible drinking water that was clean, and it was such a privilege and a huge part of my life being connected to the Rockies. But at the same time, it could also be so damaging. So yeah, just, I guess, a complicated relationship.
A complicated relationship.
Hi, my name is Carlo.
Carlo is a senior at SFS Qatar, studying international politics.
He's from the Philippines, but he grew up in Qatar.
So those are two places at the extreme ends of water security. Here in Qatar, water is easily accessible to everyone, but one of the concerns that we have here is how to secure these water resources for the future. Qatar is making strides in infrastructure to preserve that. However, there are challenges that lie along the way. But back in the Philippines, we have a lot of water resources, but our problem is knowing how to harness it in a way that's responsible.
In a way that's responsible.
It's both an interesting dynamic, yet something that we should seriously think about. The dynamic we have now is unsustainable in the long run, and the approach should be changed into something that harnesses the available resources efficiently for our future.
My name is Cooper.
Cooper is a senior in the School of Foreign Service studying STEA with an energy and an environmental concentration.
Throughout his time at Georgetown, he studied a lot about water.
I'm from Houston, Texas, so I've suffered from hurricanes. I've waded through chest-high water. I think that's where my negative relationship with water comes from. But I've also spent a lot of time in coastal Maine, where the ocean has brought my family together for years now. That's where I think my positive relationship with water comes from. But I think that my rational relationship with water really began when I was on a trip with the Boy Scouts to a place called Northern Tier, which is in the boundary waters between the United States and Canada. During that trip, myself and 7 others canoed for over 150 miles over 2 weeks into the Canadian wilderness and back into the US. We had practically no interaction with other people during that time, and there was no civilization to be seen. It was the wilderness. What this means is that any food or water that you need to eat or drink has to be carried in on your back or gotten for yourself.
You have to get it for yourself.
So when you have to actually filter and purify and create your own drinkable water, I think it sort of reinforces the idea that something has to happen to that water before it gets to you. You know, when you turn on the tap, clean water doesn't just spawn or manifest out of nowhere.
It doesn't just spawn or manifest.
It has to be brought to you from somewhere. It has to be cleaned to make sure that you know it's good. There was one day, though, on this trip, where we canoed on a lake called Lake Argo. That was everybody's favorite day. This is because the water in Lake Argo was so clean that you could dip your water bottle down the side into the lake and drink it straight from there. The water tasted great, by the way. At the time, it was something that everybody was looking forward to. But now for me, it's something that I look back on with awe because of how absolutely unheard of it is. I think that when you have to source your own drinking water, you realize just how annoying it is and how much time it takes. And then you start to think about, how on earth does this work for entire cities? And then you start to think about where your water really comes from.
My name is Mingen.
Amen. Miriam's a junior on the Qatar campus studying international politics.
In my country, China, water comes in very varied forms. It could be in the river, it also could be in the lake, it also could be the ocean. And I live in mainland, where I don't have any ocean nearby. So I love Qatar. I'm very, very interested in energy and sustainability, especially renewable water energy. And that's the major I come to Doha campus because I really want to learn more about energy and how they view water here.
How they view water here.
There's an island in China. It's a vocational island, and the size is pretty similar to Qatar. And that's the place I always go in winter break, and I will continue to go this winter. Because me and my family will go there, and that's why I feel a strong connection between me and water.
A strong connection with water.
I really, really love the ocean. And my hometown doesn't have an ocean there. But the love does not come from nowhere. I love the ocean because it gives us energy and it gives us life.
It gives us life.
My name is Miriam.
Miriam's a junior on the Kottage campus studying international politics.
Where her water comes from and why she's interested in this conference are two very interlinked questions.
My understanding of where water comes from is very related to material privilege. I've lived in Qatar for 9 years, And the water we have comes from either very limited groundwater resources or it comes from desal plants that are highly energy intensive, highly costly to run. And yet we have the ability to do that because we have oil money. And that oil money obviously leads to carbon emissions that will only make water crises around the world much, much worse. So we're in a place of privilege where, despite our natural water scarcity, we can artificially manufacture water security because we have finances that are built off carbon emissions, which is a very dichotomous system.
A very dichotomous system.
And it really makes you think, what is the cost of the resource that I'm consuming without even a second thought?
What is the cost?
And how do we manage it going forward?
How do we manage?
So that everyone has access to it. I'm also Pakistani. I was also affected by the 2022 floods, and those also have a history behind them of material privileges. The places that were most drastically hit by the floods were places where dams and barrages had been built, and rivers had been redirected by our colonial powers during the British Raj to make sure that those places were as fertile as possible. But that meant that our natural waterways weren't allowed to reach our marginalized communities. Our natural rivers weren't allowed to go out into the sea. And so they caused famines 80 years ago that killed 4 million people. In 2022, they caused floods that displaced millions. So we see time and time again that water security, water abundance, and fertility in one time, in one place, leads to loss of life and displacement. Water crises and water insecurity in another time, another place. So this dichotomy leads me to kind of want to understand, how can we sustainably develop infrastructure globally so that the water we have doesn't come at the cost of anyone else's water security?
My name is Elle.
Elle is from Florida. She is also studying international security in the DC campus.
When I think of my most intimate connection to water, I think mostly of the water that exists in each of us. The water that we are.
We are the water.
The water that not just gives life, but is actually the majority of our own composition.
We are the water.
And then I think of my time in Florida, in the place that I call home, where the water that you drink felt from an early age, to borrow Cooper's phrase, it felt manifest.
Manifest.
It didn't feel miraculous, because that implies that I admired it, or respected it, or was in awe of it. I just always assumed it would be there when you turn the tap on. I had to be actively awakened to both the precarity and the privilege forced out of this entitlement mindset when I was in Cité Soleil, Haiti, or in the southern provinces of Cambodia. But then at home, there was also this sort of different category or discernment of clean, safe, good water. When there's blue or green algae in the ocean, runoff from the sugarcane fields into the Everglades, the water that is this sanctuary of play, a place of joy, of spirituality, of togetherness, suddenly it's also a threat, polluted, diseased, taking away breath instead of giving life. I also call Maine home, a very quiet, very, very rural town nestled in the White Mountains. The lake there is calm and pristine. You can't have motorboats on our part of the lake, only sailboats and rickety canoes. About 65 years ago, when my grandfather set up camp on the lake, he'd bathe himself, shampoo his hair. Now we don't allow that because the soap feels unnatural, violating, contaminating, impure. That's the preciousness we confer upon the water there. It's a relationship of accountability. We're always testing the water, testing it to drink, to cook with, to clean ourselves with, testing it to grow our gardens.
Everyone who lives on Lake Kezar is a member of the Kezar Lake Watershed Association. And so every time there's a newcomer to the lake, and they come with their jet skis and their motorboats and their expectations, we bring them into this simple thinking that's radically unlike what we experience in the cities each of us comes from when we go to the lake. This simple understanding that we're not removed from the water, that the water is not guaranteed to us, not meant only for our exploitation and extraction, but rather that we owe it and that we owe each other both stewardship and also sometimes sacrifice. I envision a future where water is a priority.
I envision a future where we're together in this.
I envision a future where we're not counting down decades and years.
I envision a future where people don't have to be scared of what they drink.
I envision a future where everyone can move on from their political inertia and take global accountability for global climate threats.
I envision a future where our upcoming generations get to see all the water resources in their purest form.
I envision a future that everybody can be equally accessible to the water.
I envision a future where my children have a better world than I do.
I envision a future where policymakers are more open to come up with solutions to solve this water crisis.
I envision a future where water is memorized.
Oh, we're done. Okay.
Well, I know I'm not supposed to choose favorites, but I think the last two sessions were my favorite. Sorry, but I had to. That was great. So I think it's clear, water is life. It flows through everything. We've seen it over the last 2 days, from geopolitical security to biodiversity to culture, history, climate change, agriculture, food production, climate mitigation, adaptation, to storytelling, to the youth. We are totally dependent on water in so many ways. Sustaining the Oasis is dependent on water. We've covered an enormous amount of ground over the last 2 days, really almost just superficially. We haven't really honestly gotten down to the aquifers that we really need to get to really understand the depth at which water penetrates everything that we do and every day and every cell of our bodies, our beings. I've learned a lot. At a minimum, I'm going to try to always be creative, conscientious, and disagreeable, or a shit disturber, which I'm usually pretty good at. But I want to make sure that I thank you all for attending. I mean, that's really, this has been about all of us, and we've all contributed to a wonderful, wonderful 2 days. What we did over these 2 days is really part of the solution in many ways that are direct, in many ways that are indirect. We're shaping the dialogue in many parts of what we're trying to do in the COP28. We'll have papers and manuscripts, hopefully, that will be generated directly. So we're shaping that dialogue in a permanent way. There'll be new collaborations that are going to develop here, new partnerships that we can't even predict, some of which have probably spawned and have already started, some of which will start in a week, some in a month, some in a year. You never know how these things evolve, but just by being with one another and talking and thinking and hearing and listening to the stories, listening to the science, stories will emerge, papers will emerge, partnerships will emerge, research projects will emerge. Many things will emerge that are going to be hard for us to really predict, but I'm confident that things are going to happen. And it'll happen in this part of the world, but it is also going to happen in many other parts of the world. Because yes, this is a very arid part of the world, but water is part of every part of this planet. And you just saw people from all over the world right here, and every time I see something like that, it moves me in so many ways. But water is important everywhere on this planet, whether it's in ice or it's in sand, it's there. So this is just the beginning. We're doing all sorts of things. This is also the beginning of a conversation that we're having between DC and Doha in how we build an environmental presence here in an area that is just so critical. Water is obviously going to be part of that, but this is just the beginning of an intense period, hopefully over the next 12 months, where we really think about what's the curriculum that we develop. What are the educational offerings that we institutionalize at GUQ with other partners here? What are the research agendas that we undertake at a place like Doha, where we have such a broad reach over an entire Gulf region that needs additional participation by a broad range of scholars? So this is really just the beginning, and an event like this, which Dean Safwan Masri really kind of thought about and kicked off, and it was a brilliant idea, is going to have so many outcomes that it's just really exciting to even think about. So that's basically what I wanted to say, but I also wanted to thank some really key people. Raha has devoted so much energy and time to this over the last few months. I don't know if you recognize or understand how much time these things take. I certainly do, because I had to keep convincing her, do you really want to do this? And so she did, and she nailed it. So let's give her a round of applause. There were also several key people, both here at GUQ and also from DC, that were contributing to this, to really the substance of what this conference was, including Marcus King, Mark Giordano, Jamie Olsen, and Ann Nebel all really contributed in deep ways to pulling this all together. And also Derek Goldman, who really added this last piece, and Ashanee Kottage, who added the last two pieces in ways that really means a lot to me and everything that we do around the environment. And finally, I also want to thank Dean Masri again for being such an awesome colleague, an awesome partner in how we tackle these things globally. So one last round of applause for all those folks, please. And thank you very much.
Well, I think, Pete, you said it all. And so I'll just add a couple of things. I mean, I think the student performance, it wasn't a performance. It really wasn't. It was very genuine. And thank you, Derek, for putting this together. And thank you to all of you. I look at you and I listen to you, and I'm reminded, not that I need to be reminded, or any of us needs to be reminded of why we do what we do, those of us who work in universities and who work in academia, because you inspire us. You inspire us and you make us feel incredibly hopeful about the future. So you talked about your visions for the future. I envision a future with you leading it, and with you fixing the problems that we feel so incredibly bad about having created for you. Our generation and previous generations, we exploited the earth. We created havoc, and we're putting it on your shoulders to fix it. But when I listen to you the way that we all did this evening, I feel hope. I feel like you're going to be able to do it. And unfair as that is of a burden on you, I know that the world will be better in your hands than it was in ours and in our predecessors. This has been incredible. And Pete, in you, I feel I have the perfect colleague, the perfect partner, the perfect friend. We came together, we planted a seed, and then our best asset has been, I think, finding the right people to work on it. And so Raha, can't thank you enough. Jamie, and Mark, Marcus, you're the ones who really pulled it together, and Pete and I stewarded it, and I'm so glad with what we've done over the past couple of days. This has been amazing, and when I think about dialogues, when I think about hiwarat, it really is to kickstart important agendas into the future. This has really been one of the greatest values of something like this, has been to bring together people who care about common issues, to bring them together from Washington, from Doha, from academia, from the non-academic institutions, from around the region. We have people here from Palestine, from Lebanon, from the United Arab Emirates, and elsewhere, coming together and really starting a conversation. And the beauty of it is that we don't know exactly where it's going to lead, right? We know that there will be findings that will be pulled together, will be shared with the COP28 presidency. That's a very concrete thing. We know that on Wednesday, we're getting together, the DC and the Qatar team, to think about and start planning for a future academic program in environmental sustainability, informed by what has happened over the past couple of days. We know a few things, but there's a lot that we don't know, and that's the beauty of it, in that this is really an experiment, a lab that will lead to unexpected results. I want to reflect back to Malcolm Gladwell's keynote yesterday and the mindset that is needed to confront the existential threats in climate change, urgency. I loved the notion of disagreeableness. I never thought that I would aspire to be very disagreeable every day. And so that's a wonderful thing to be thinking of. We learned a lot about the Qatari Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and its seriousness in addressing climate change with initiatives honoring its international commitments and focusing on water security. We learned about water security and new realities, the specific impacts of climate change on this region, significant vulnerability that this brings with it, and about the archaeological evidence of sophisticated and innovative technologies for water management from hundreds of years ago, introduced to Europe in the early Islamic period. But you know, we're in a region, if you think about the broader region, the Romans were here a bit to the north, the Nabateans were here, Muslim civilizations, if you go south to Yemen, I mean, you know, there's so much to learn from those civilizations and from those eras. From the students especially, I mean, you know, just putting it in perspective, and the relationship, Cooper, you talked about the negative relationship with water and the positive relationship with water. And, you know, we learned yesterday also about how water cannot be taken for granted. And we have a relationship with it. We absolutely have a relationship with it. And we cannot take it for granted. It is central to our lives. It's central to religious faith. It is central to culture. It's central to contemporary society. We talked about education. I mean, how important it is that we focus on an interdisciplinary approach to science, how important it is to build awareness around water. Can't remember who it was. I think Mahmoud from the Middle East Institute talked about the Arab Barometer. And I was really struck by how, if I, you know, loosely translating what I understood from you, that when asked, people in the so-called Arab region didn't identify climate change as a priority, but water security, or the cleanliness of water, the availability, the access to water as a very high priority, right? And, you know, yes, in this region, I, you know, grew up in Jordan, water, what day does the water come? What day does the water get delivered? You know, you spoke about how in different parts of the world, you know, you look for the sort of every 2 weeks, water arrives in a tanker and so on. So it's scarce. You know that it is not always there. You're aware of the geopolitical dimensions of it. All you have to do, by the way, is go to the West Bank and you see the disparity in the quality of life that the availability of water makes between the illegal settlements and the towns and villages. But that there's no connection between that and climate change, I thought was very, very, very telling. In sum, we learned a lot, and we have a lot to look forward to in terms of future projects, future programs that will emanate from this. I think I've learned a lot. It's not only about what you learn, but it's about how your psyche changes, how your approach to things changes, how your mindset changes, how you think about water and its centrality in your life, and your approach to it and your relationship with it changes. So I thank all of you for everything that you brought to the entire ecosystem that we have here in Doha. And thanks to all of you also for sticking around 2 very long days. Special thanks to those who came from abroad. And we look forward to the reception and to many things to come. And Raha, again, huge thanks to you, to everyone, but to you in particular. Maha Uredi also, who is sort of the invisible soldier. I don't know how much you see her, but she makes it all seem very, very easy. So thank you, Maha. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Now it's time to enjoy and continue the dialogue, if you like, or just talk about water and your perceptions. Please join the reception, I think, outside of here. Thank you.